Can your personality change over time? This is one of the most asked questions in psychology and specifically personality psychology. When we think of our personality, we generally think of, who we are, how we act, the kind of person that we are, and the kind of person that we want to be. And a lot of people want to know, can we change who we are? Can our personality develop, and to what extent can it develop? So that's going to be the topic today. And I'm going to bring you through a few papers and what the research says about how personality changes across the lifespan. Let's get into it. I know a lot of my viewers like MBTI, but I think that this question is one that is better tackled through the lens of the Big Five model or the five-factor personality model. I do have an older video discussing whether or not personality type can change, and I think that's a similar but different question. Today we're talking about more general personality. Can your general personality characteristics change? So we're going to look at it through the lens of the five-factor personality model and see what the research says regarding whether or not these traits tend to develop over time or whether or not you yourself can attempt to make active and meaningful change in your own personality. Even though we're going to be discussing this topic through the lens of the five-factor model, it's important to recognize that this model doesn't encompass the entirety of what personality is. We measure a lot of other aspects in personality as psychological researchers, including things like impulsivity, which aren't exactly contained within the constructs of the five-factor model. And it's important to remember that while we're viewing these factors, you're not going to be viewing the entirety of personality. And also the reflections of how these traits can be seen in a person or in different people can be different types of personalities. They can be different reflections of what we think personality is. For example, when we're looking at someone who's extremely conscientious, we might not see someone who has those scores as being the same as someone else who has those scores. And the mixing and matching of certain personality characteristics and scores and traits within the five-factor model can lead to different types of people within the same model. It's very difficult to encompass all of personality within one given model. And the reason the Big Five model is called the Big Five model is because these five traits are meant to encompass a lot of different traits within the five major ones, which is why the five-factor model has subfacets, which kind of represent the individual personality characteristics within each of these models. So moving forward, just remember that personality is something wider and bigger than just the Big Five, but the Big Five is a great launching point for discussing whether or not personality can change across the lifespan. There's two primary ways that we can tackle the question of whether or not our personality can change across our life. And the first is going to be whether or not age has an impact on our personality traits in the five-factor model. Because if we look at age and whether or not our personality is going to change in general across age, if we look at a lot of people and see their age and then measure their personality, we'll be able to see, are there general, relationships to what age someone is and what their personality is like. And the other way we're going to look at this is whether or not you can change your personality on the individual level. Can you make some sort of volitional change in your life that will impact your personality traits and how much or how little of a trait that you have? It's important to look at both of these because you want to look at age to see whether or not the aging process is going to have a general impact on personality, because that's going to be something that's relatively present across most humans, regardless of whether or not they are trying to make a change. And then we want to look at the individual level to see whether or not we can choose to make those changes, regardless of how our age might be changing our personality in turn. The first piece of evidence that we're going to look at is a study from 2008 with a very large sample size called Age Differences in the Big Five Across the Lifespan, Evidence from Two National Samples. I'm going to read you the abstract from this study, and then we can discuss what the results of that mean. Cross-sectional age differences in the Big Five personality traits were investigated using two large datasets from Britain and Germany, the British Household Panel Study, 14,000 sample size, and the German Socioeconomic Panel Study, 20,800 sample size. Participants ranged in age from 16 to mid-80s and completed a 15-item version of the Big Five inventory. The observed age trends were generally consistent across both datasets. Extroversion and openness were negatively associated with age, whereas agreeableness was positively associated with age. Average levels of conscientiousness were highest for participants in middle age. The one exception was that neuroticism was slightly negatively associated with age in the BHPS and slightly positively associated with age in the GSEOP. So the two different samples had slightly differing scores on neuroticism. The general takeaway from the study is that extroversion and openness are going to be something that slightly decline with age. So as we get older, maybe we have less energy, maybe we're not as social, we start to maybe go out a little bit less. And of course, this isn't going to be for everyone. And just because the score is decreasing doesn't mean it's going to decrease a lot. So if you have someone who is in the 95th percentile of extroversion in their youth, they're probably not going to be going down to something like the 60th percentile in extroversion as they get older. They're still going to be a very extroverted person. And the same is going to be true with openness. Now, openness and age is something that makes a lot of sense. When you think of people as they get older, they become a little more attached to the way that things were when they grew up. So even if they're someone who's very open, they're going to be someone who likes something that they had as a child, or they knew a way to do something when they were younger, and we tend to not like change as much as we get older. This is why the most open adults tend to seem relatively closed-minded to even the most open adulted younger generation, and this is because they are more open in general to even the open-ended or open to experience adults. So that's going to be one of the major changes we're going to see with age across the lifespan in reference to the big five personality traits. The other one that we're going to be looking at is going to be agreeableness, which is positively associated with age, meaning that as we get older, we become more agreeable. We become people who tend to get into arguments less. We're able to get along with more people. And this just makes sense. Most people, as they age, are going to learn how to better interact with people. They're going to care a little bit more about society. They're probably going to start a family. And as people start families, they become a little bit softer in tone and how they talk to people. And again, these changes aren't going to be massive. We're not going to be seeing people who are extremely unagreeable just turn into super agreeable people. We're going to see people who are slightly agreeable becoming more agreeable. We're going to see people who are slightly disagreeable becoming, relatively average in their agreeableness. And this is something that you'll see as they get older. In my opinion, the most interesting finding from this study is what's called a curvilinear relationship with conscientiousness and age. So what that means is that there's going to be a relationship that kind of looks like a slope with age and conscientiousness. So younger people are generally less conscientious. Middle-aged people tend to be the most conscientious. And then as we get to the older years in life, we kind of lose that conscientiousness again. And what that generally relates to is the kind of work-life balance that we have as middle-aged people. As we hit our 20s, as we hit our 30s, we tend to become more invested in our career and what we want to be doing with our life, goals, these sorts of things. So we tend to develop a little bit of conscientiousness that's going to allow us to achieve those things, or we become more concerned with achieving those things, which will in turn allow us to become more conscientious in our actions and efforts. And then as we hit our 50s, 60s, and later years in our life, we lose a little bit of that because it's not as important for us to be striving for these huge, grand goals or promotions at work because we are already kind of established, we already have achieved the things that we want to achieve, or we're happy where we are in life at the moment. The last trait discussed in this is going to be neuroticism. And the two data sets had differing results, where they found in one data set that neuroticism increased with age, and in the other data set they found that it decreased with age. My personal hypothesis or speculation about this would be that it's probably related to culture or how we view the times that we live in, whether or not we have a stressful environment, these sorts of things. If you're in a culture or country or place that allows you to have your needs met and you don't feel stressed about that, you're probably going to see a decrease in neuroticism and how you react to things negatively across the lifespan. Where if you're in an environment where your needs are not being met, or you're stressed, or maybe your country or culture is at war, maybe you're going to see an increase in neuroticism because you need that kind of emotional response to situations to maybe help you survive or deal with the negative situations that are constantly arising in your life. But again, that is just my own speculation. The other side of the question of whether or not our personality can change is whether or not we can choose to make changes to our personality ourselves. Can we volitionally make changes in our behavior that will allow us to change our personality traits and characteristics? Well, a variety of studies have been done that have attempted to see whether or not they could get participants to engage in certain personality-related behaviors and whether or not that would impact their personality or how they experience life. The first study we're going to look at is called The Costs and Benefits of Acting Extroverted, a randomized controlled trial. Essentially, they got a group of about 150 people, split them into control and normal groups, and then they said, we're going to get some of you to act extroverted, and then we're going to get some of you to just do normal activities to be a control group, and we're going to measure whether or not this has an impact on how you perceive yourself, how happy you are, these sorts of things. So the things that they measured in the end after getting these people to act extroverted were their positive affect, negative affect, feelings of authenticity, and tiredness associated with the actions that they are engaging in. So overall, the study found that there was a positive effect on acting extroverted in all people. And what they found was that actually this positive effect was going to be lesser in people who were already introverted or people who scored more introverted beforehand. And this is going to be the big caveat with this study is that while overall there was an increase in positive affect across the entire study group, they found that the introverts, while they had a slight increase in positive affect, it was going to be weaker than people who were already extroverts. But this also comes with the side effect that they were also going to experience negative affect, tiredness, and feelings of inauthenticity related to acting extroverted. To me, what this says is that there is some sort of positive side effect that can come from acting extroverted, and that maybe you're going to be interacting with people you like, you're going to be doing things you enjoy. But for people who are already more naturally introverted, this is going to be something that isn't sustainable because of the feelings of inauthenticity, because of the feelings of tiredness, because of the negative affect that is also associated with acting extroverted. And what this says to me is that while we can strive to maybe act more extroverted, if we're someone who's naturally introverted, we're probably not going to see some huge change in our life in becoming an extrovert. Although we can increase extroverted behavior, it will probably come at the cost of making us more tired or stressed in the long run. I think one of the key factors of this study is that we can, as humans, make decisions that go against our personality. And that can be something that can be reflected in the long term as a change in who we are. But that doesn't necessarily change our kind of base template of the personality we have, our kind of genetic predisposition toward acting certain ways, processing information in certain ways, and liking certain things. Say, for example, you have someone who's very neurotic. They struggle with anger problems. They're going to be stressed really easily in response to stressful situations. But then you take that person and they go to therapy for a year or two and they really learn to control their stress in relation to negative situations. Is this person less neurotic, or are they someone who has learned actions, behaviors, and ways of thinking to manage their predisposition towards neurotic responses to situations? And that's what I would say is that we can act however we want and we can learn to manage our personality. But I don't think we are going to see these drastic, huge changes in our actual personality in the long run. Of course, in respect to age, there's going to be changes there. But I think it's more so that we kind of find our path within the given personality that we have. Now, I do think that we can change our personality. I'm not saying that you can't change anything at all, but I'm saying that there's going to be upper and lower limits to those personality changes. Say, for example, you're someone who is 30th percentile in extroversion on the Big Five. What are the odds of you going up to being an 80th percentile in extroversion? They're not very high, and I would say probably near impossible unless there's some huge drastic change in your personality. I've had people come to me and they said, well, as a kid, I was very introverted and I was very shy. And then as I got older, I became this really bubbly extrovert. And oftentimes, what we see in those situations isn't an introvert becoming an extrovert. We're seeing someone who had a suppressed personality, someone who had to kind of push down their personality to meet their environment, finally being able to kind of come out and be their authentic self. And I don't think that represents an actual change in personality as much as it represents that we are now able to be our authentic selves despite our upbringing, despite the environment that we were once in. Maybe now we're in an environment that supports our natural personality and way of acting. And when you see a shift in your personality, make sure to think, is this something that I was suppressing in myself and now finally gets to be free? Or maybe sometimes it can be the opposite, where we were more free as a child and now we have to suppress part of our personality and we don't feel authentic. Overall, I'm really saying that your personality can change on the individual level. You can make those changes, but even more so, you can make changes in your behavior that reflect the kind of person you want to be. Because the kind of person you want to be is kind of higher order than your personality. We have the ability as humans to imagine ourselves as better people, to work towards being better people, and we can take actions that go against our natural and innate ways of responding to things. So overall, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and the general answer for whether or not your personality can change is yes, it's going to change across the lifespan in any way. but you're going to be able to make smaller changes on the personal level, but you can also go against your natural personality to become the type of person that you want to be. It just might tire you out in some situations. It just might require you to put in extra effort to uphold those personality changes because they're not reflective of your kind of base personality. I'd like to give a shout out to my Brave tier supporters on Patreon, David Santos and JB Funk, as well as my Inquisitive tier supporters on Patreon, Anna R. Dunster, Emma Bornier, Haley, and Opal Knight. Thank you for supporting me. It really means a lot and helps this channel continue.